Imagine standing inside the stone walls of a mighty medieval castle. Knights patrol the battlements, servants hurry through winding corridors, and lords and ladies feast in the great hall. But behind the grandeur, a less glamorous question lingers. Where did all the waste go? Today, we step into the hidden world of medieval sanitation, the moats, latrines, and garderobes that kept castles livable. Life inside a medieval castle was full of complexity, but nothing revealed the challenges of daily survival more than waste management. Unlike the polished stone we admire today, castles in their prime were bustling, messy, and crowded places. Hundreds of people lived within their walls: soldiers, servants, nobles, and visitors. With so many bodies, food constantly being prepared, and animals kept nearby, one issue never went away: waste. In towns, waste could be thrown into streets, but castles needed smarter systems. Their defenses kept enemies out, but also trapped smells, filth, and disease within. If waste wasn't managed, even the strongest fortress could become unbearable. To solve this, medieval builders devised a series of clever but crude systems: latrines, garderobes, cesspits, and even moats, to keep life tolerable. The most common solution was the garderobe, a private or semi-private latrine built into castle walls. From the inside, it looked like a simple wooden bench with a hole, but outside, the design was surprisingly effective. The hole often dropped directly into a pit or down the castle wall into a moat or stream. Gravity did the work, and waste was carried away, or so it was hoped. Garderobes had a practical placement. They were usually built along outer walls or in small towers, often stacked vertically, so multiple floors could use the same shaft. In wealthier castles, noble chambers had private garderobes, while servants relied on shared facilities. For castles with rivers or running water nearby, some garderobes emptied waste directly into flowing streams, reducing the smell inside. Yet, the system was far from perfect. Waste that fell into moats didn't just vanish, it mixed with stagnant water, creating foul-smelling, disease-breeding cesspools. Enemies sometimes used this to their advantage. A polluted moat weakened morale inside the castle and could spread sickness quickly. The very water that defended a castle could also turn into a health hazard. Despite the unpleasantness, garderobes had additional uses. The term itself comes from the French garder, to guard, and robe, clothing. Clothes were sometimes stored in these rooms because people believed the ammonia from waste helped kill lice and pests. Imagine keeping your best cloak in the same space as the latrine. It was practical, if not pleasant. Cesspits were another common solution. These were deep holes dug within the castle grounds where waste collected. Workers known as gong farmers or night soil men had the terrible job of emptying these pits, often done under cover of night. The work was foul, dangerous, and essential. Without cleaning, cesspits overflowed, threatening both hygiene and castle life. The design of latrines reflected social hierarchy. Lords and ladies had private, sometimes decorated garderobes, while soldiers and servants shared basic communal facilities. Yet, even for nobles, privacy was limited. Wooden doors or curtains provided modesty, but sound and smell carried easily. Waste management was never truly invisible. Food waste and animal waste also required careful handling. Castles kept livestock like pigs and chickens for food, and their waste was sometimes thrown into the same pits as human waste or spread in fields as fertilizer. Refuse from kitchens, including bones and scraps, was dumped in middens, open waste heaps within castle yards. Over time, these became smelly and attracted pests. Moats served multiple purposes in sanitation. Waste often drained into them, whether by design or neglect. In some cases, fresh water was directed into moats to flush waste away. But stagnant moats became breeding grounds for disease. Archaeological digs around old castles often reveal layers of human waste, animal bones, and refuse preserved in these watery defenses. Despite their flaws, these systems were essential. Without garderobes, cesspits, and moats, castles would have been uninhabitable. For those living inside, they provided a balance between defense and daily comfort, even if conditions were far from what we'd consider sanitary today. And yet, for all the ingenuity, medieval waste management reveals just how hard it was to balance grandeur with practicality. Behind the stone walls and banners of chivalry, the realities of life and death were shaped by something as simple as where people relieved themselves. Inside the towering walls of a medieval castle, the garderobe was perhaps the most familiar sight for sanitation. To modern eyes, it was shockingly simple. A bench with a hole, often built into a small chamber jutting out from the wall. Yet this modest structure reflected careful engineering. Stone chutes funneled waste away from living quarters, preventing direct buildup inside. In many castles, the waste fell directly into a pit, river, or moat, depending on the geography. The design varied from castle to castle. Some garderobes were narrow slits in the wall, offering little more than a plank to sit upon, while others were surprisingly elaborate. In royal castles, garderobes might be tiled, ventilated, or built with small windows. For light, servants scrubbed them with herbs or ashes to reduce odors. Wealthy nobles, sometimes even, had multiple garderobes connected to their private chambers, reflecting both status and the need for comfort. For the majority of castle residents, however, the experience was far less refined. Shared garderobes, called latrine towers, were positioned at the edge of courtyards or along outer walls. These communal facilities served soldiers, servants, and visitors. At busy times, such as during sieges or festivals, the strain on these systems was enormous. Imagine dozens of men-at-arms lining up for their turn, the smell thick in the air, the sounds echoing within stone chambers. Privacy was nearly non-existent. The placement of garderobes also reveals the balance between practicality and defense. Builders had to ensure that waste disposal didn't compromise castle security. Openings were small and narrow, preventing intruders from climbing inside. In fact, there are accounts of attackers attempting to infiltrate castles through garderobe chutes, only to be trapped in foul, narrow shafts. To prevent this, iron bars were sometimes placed across openings, ensuring the latrine was safe, if not pleasant. Yet, even with precautions, garderobes carried risks. They were dark, damp, and often slippery. Falling into the shaft was a deadly accident. Chroniclers occasionally recorded tragic or comedic tales of people slipping into cesspits or garderobe shafts, rarely surviving the experience. Waste pits could release toxic gases, and workers tasked with cleaning them faced constant danger. In larger castles, some garderobes were designed with rudimentary flushing systems. Buckets of water or diverted streams helped wash waste down chutes, Though far from modern plumbing, this innovation reduced buildup and made life slightly more tolerable. Archaeological evidence shows stone channels directing water toward latrine shafts, an early attempt at harnessing running water for sanitation. Beyond the garderobe, middens, or refuse heaps, were another part of castle waste management. These heaps collected kitchen scraps, bones, broken pottery, and anything unsuitable for garderobes. Located in corners of courtyards or near outer walls, they quickly became infested with rats and insects. During sieges, when waste disposal outside was impossible, middens overflowed, worsening disease outbreaks inside castles. The challenge of animal waste was equally significant. Horses, essential for knights and transport, produced large amounts of manure daily. Castles often had stables within their walls, and mucking out was a constant duty for grooms and stable hands. Manure was sometimes repurposed as fertilizer in nearby fields, but in overcrowded castles, it piled up quickly. Combined with human waste, it created a constant struggle for cleanliness. Moats added both help and harm to sanitation. When fed by rivers, they could flush away waste that drained from garderobes and kitchens. But stagnant moats became foul ditches filled with sewage, refuse, and rotting animal carcasses. Chronicles describe moats black with filth, their stench spreading for miles. For enemies laying siege, the smell was as much a weapon as the walls themselves. One overlooked aspect of waste management was laundry. Servants used castle wells or rivers to wash clothes and linens, but water sources often lay dangerously close to waste outlets. If streams carried waste from garderobes, contamination was inevitable. Waterborne diseases like dysentery, cholera, and typhoid thrived under such conditions, silently weakening garrisons and noble households alike. Even so, medieval builders displayed remarkable ingenuity. Cesspits were lined with stone to prevent seepage. Some castles built waste chutes directly above running water to keep interiors cleaner. The placement of kitchens, stables, and garderobes followed deliberate planning, ensuring waste flowed away rather than stagnating inside walls. Still, sanitation was never invisible. The smells of waste hung in castle corridors, drifting from garderobes or middens. Servants burned herbs like rosemary or lavender to mask the odor. Nobles sometimes carried pomanders, small containers filled with spices, to guard against foul air. Yet the reality remained. Behind the glamour of banquets and tournaments, castle life was shadowed by waste. The very word garderobe captures the blend of necessity and practicality. As mentioned earlier, clothing was stored there, believed to be protected from lice and fleas by the ammonia fumes. This odd practice reveals medieval creativity in confronting both pests and waste. Though strange to us, it reflected a world where every resource, even foul air, was turned to some advantage. Ultimately, the management of waste inside castles reveals a civilization that balanced survival with ingenuity. Defenses may have kept out armies, but it was sanitation that kept life inside bearable. Whether through garderobes, cesspits, or moats, waste was constantly present, shaping the rhythms of daily existence within stone walls. As castles grew in size and complexity, so too did the challenge of dealing with human waste. A small wooden fort with only a few dozen people could manage with simple pits or trenches. But by the high Middle Ages, castles housed hundreds of residents: nobles, soldiers, servants, artisans, and guests. Waste wasn't just an inconvenience, it became a daily logistical problem that demanded careful planning. One of the most striking features of sanitation in castles was the latrine tower. These were tall stone structures built along the edges of castles, often extending outward like small turrets. Their sole purpose was to provide space for multiple garderobes, stacked vertically. Waste from the upper floors dropped through shafts into pits or directly outside the walls. This system allowed castles to concentrate waste in designated areas rather than scattering it throughout living spaces. The communal nature of latrine towers reflected the reality of castle life. Soldiers, for instance, often used shared garderobes in these towers. During busy times, like festivals, musters, or sieges, these spaces would have been crowded and unpleasant. Privacy was minimal. Narrow wooden partitions might separate seats, but the sounds and smells filled the chamber. For servants and guards, there was no choice. It was part of life inside stone walls. For nobles, however, the story was different. The lord and lady of the castle often had private garderobes connected directly to their chambers. These might even feature small stone shelves for candles or herbs, ensuring light and a slightly better smell. Some noble garderobes were fitted with wooden doors for privacy, while others were placed in alcoves with thick curtains. Though far from luxurious by modern standards, these spaces symbolized privilege. Interestingly, waste management also intersected with warfare. During a siege, every resource inside a castle mattered. Food supplies dwindled, water grew scarce, and waste piled up quickly. If pits overflowed or garderobe shafts clogged, the health of the defenders was at risk. Disease spread rapidly in confined quarters. Accounts from medieval chroniclers describe garrisons weakened not only by hunger, but by sickness caused by poor sanitation. In such cases, waste management became as vital to survival as arrows and boiling oil. Castles with access to rivers or streams had an advantage. Builders often diverted flowing water to carry waste away from garderobes or kitchens. This early form of plumbing reduced smells and made life more tolerable. In some cases, channels were carved into stone walls to guide water toward waste outlets. Yet this was a double-edged sword. If the enemy poisoned or blocked the water supply, the castle quickly became unlivable. The role of gong farmers, or cesspit cleaners, deserves attention. These workers often came from the lowest ranks of society. Their job was to descend into waste pits, shovel out the filth, and cart it away. The work was so foul that it was usually done at night to avoid the stares and disgust of others. Despite the danger and disgust, gong farmers were essential. Without them, castles would have drowned in their own waste. But sanitation wasn't just about human waste. Food scraps from great feasts, bones from roasted animals, and spoiled grain all needed disposal. Kitchen waste was often dumped into middens, where it rotted in piles. In some cases, dogs and pigs were allowed to scavenge, reducing the volume, but creating more mess. Archaeological digs frequently uncover these middens, filled with animal bones, pottery shards, and even broken tools. They provide a vivid glimpse of daily life inside castles, right down to the leftovers of meals. Animals themselves contributed heavily to waste management problems. Horses, essential for knights and transport, produced manure in staggering quantities. Large castles had stables for dozens of horses, each requiring daily cleaning. Servants shoveled dung into heaps, which were sometimes used as fertilizer in nearby fields. Chickens, pigs, and goats added to the mess, and their waste often mixed with human refuse in shared disposal areas. The problem of smell was constant. Even the grandest halls could not escape the odors drifting from garderobes and middens. Nobles fought back with perfumes, incense, and herbs. Servants scattered rushes and straw on floors, sometimes mixing them with dried lavender or mint to mask unpleasant scents. Yet, the odor of waste remained a defining feature of castle life, a reminder that luxury always sat alongside discomfort. Moats, too, played a unique role. While their primary purpose was defense, they often became open sewers. Waste from garderobes emptied directly into them, especially if no nearby river was available to flush the system. This meant that moats could be foul, stagnant swamps of sewage and refuse. For attackers, the smell alone was discouraging. For defenders, however, it created a dangerous breeding ground for disease. What fascinates historians today is the ingenuity behind these crude systems. Builders knew that waste had to be carried away from living spaces, even without modern science. They understood the dangers of filth. By using gravity, water flow, and architectural planning, they created workable solutions for the time. Every garderobe shaft, every cesspit, and every waste channel reveals careful thought, even if the results were imperfect. From the outside, castles inspire awe with their towers, battlements, and massive stone walls. But behind those walls, daily survival depended on dealing with the most basic human need. Waste management may not have been glamorous, but it was at the heart of keeping a castle functioning. By now, it's clear that sanitation was an unavoidable part of castle life, but the ways people adapted to it reveal not only their ingenuity, but also their acceptance of realities we might find unthinkable today. For them, waste was not hidden behind pipes or underground sewers. It was part of daily existence, managed through routines that blended necessity with resilience. One of the most revealing examples is the multi-story garderobe system. In some castles, a single shaft served several floors, with each level having its own seat above the same chute. Waste from the higher chambers fell past the lower ones, eventually landing in a pit or moat. This design maximized space efficiency, but it also meant that anyone using a lower garderobe risked unpleasant encounters with waste from above. The experience was practical, but far from comfortable. To reduce odors, ash or straw was sometimes scattered into garderobes and cesspits. Ash absorbed moisture and masked smells, while straw helped keep waste from sticking to stone chutes. Servants were responsible for maintaining these areas, sweeping, scrubbing, and occasionally carrying buckets of water to rinse the shafts. Their work, though often invisible in the historical record, was crucial to keeping life inside the castle bearable. Another fascinating aspect was how sanitation reflected social order. The lord's private garderobe was typically located close to his bedchamber, easily accessible, and often better maintained. Servants might line the chamber with wood or stone for comfort, or even add small ventilation slits. Meanwhile, common soldiers had little more than a crude seat in a cold, damp tower. Sanitation became another way that privilege and hierarchy manifested inside castle walls. Waste management also influenced architecture. Builders designed castles with garderobe towers projecting outward, so waste dropped away from the foundation. In some cases, chutes were angled to direct waste toward running water. These design choices reveal a constant negotiation between fortification and sanitation. Every wall and tower had to balance the need for defense with the equally urgent need to dispose of filth. There's also the matter of disease. Modern science tells us that waste carries bacteria and parasites, but medieval people didn't fully understand germs. Still, they noticed the link between filth and sickness. Chronicles describe outbreaks of dysentery during sieges when waste overflowed into living spaces. Some castles responded by digging emergency pits or even expelling waste over walls under cover of night. Desperation drove innovation, but not always with success. Moats, once again, played a double role. They were defenses first, but when used as dumping grounds for waste, they became hazards. Archaeological digs around castle moats often uncover layers of human waste, food scraps, and discarded items. These finds paint a vivid picture of how daily life intersected with castle defenses. Imagine an enemy trying to cross a moat filled not only with water, but with years of accumulated filth, a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. Another overlooked element of waste management was urine collection. Urine was not always discarded. It had practical uses. Tanners used it in leather working, dyers in cloth preparation, and cleaners as a form of disinfectant. Some castles gathered urine separately for these purposes, showing that waste could even become a resource. This recycling reveals the practicality of medieval life, where nothing was truly wasted if it could serve another purpose. The servants who handled waste had some of the hardest jobs in the castle. They emptied cesspits, shoveled middens, and mucked stables. Known as gong farmers or night soil men, they worked in dangerous, toxic conditions. Gases from cesspits could suffocate them, and direct contact with waste carried constant risk of illness. Yet without their labor, the grandeur of castle life would have collapsed under its own filth. By examining waste management, we gain a more complete view of medieval castles. They were not just symbols of power and fortification, but living communities. Behind the stone towers and banners, human needs dictated routines. Waste management was as much a part of castle life as feasts, battles, or courtly love. And that is why even in the story of castles, where knights and kings take the spotlight, it is worth remembering the humble garderobe, the smelly cesspit, and the overworked gong farmer. They are unsung parts of history, shaping survival in ways we rarely consider. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the hidden side of medieval castles, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more fascinating journeys into history as everyday secrets. When we think of medieval castles, we imagine high towers, drawbridges, and mighty stone walls. But within those walls, daily life demanded practical solutions, and one of the most pressing problems was dealing with human waste. The story of castle sanitation is not just about architecture. It's about the daily rhythms of survival, comfort, and adaptation. One of the cleverest yet simplest features was the chamber pot. These small containers, made of clay, wood, or metal, were used during the night or in rooms without direct access to garderobes. In the morning, servants carried the pots to be emptied into cesspits or directly outside. This routine kept life moving smoothly, but also made sanitation a constant, visible task. Servants often bore the brunt of these duties, quietly sustaining the comfort of nobles and knights. In grand castles, garderobes were sometimes positioned with surprising care. Builders considered wind direction so that foul smells drifted away from living quarters. Small ventilation slits in the stonework carried odors outside. Such details reveal that even in an age without plumbing, people understood airflow and sanitation in practical, architectural ways. The design of garderobe shafts varied. Some were straight vertical drops, others angled to direct waste into pits. A few led into flowing watercourses, washing filth away naturally. Archaeological digs reveal that waste often mixed with food scraps and discarded objects, giving historians valuable insights into daily diets, household items, and even trade goods used inside castles. What was once garbage has become a treasure trove for understanding the past. Interestingly, garderobes could also serve defensive purposes in times of siege, when every part of a castle needed to hold strategic value. Garderobe shafts could become hidden escape routes. Chronicles mention instances of prisoners escaping through waste chutes, filthy, dangerous, but sometimes the only path to freedom. The same design that removed waste could, in dire situations, carry away people. The psychological aspect of waste cannot be overlooked either. In an age where disease was common, the smell and sight of filth carried both fear and disgust. Medieval chroniclers often described besieged castles where waste overflowed, creating unbearable conditions. This wasn't just unpleasant, it was demoralizing. Maintaining clean systems meant sustaining morale during long sieges, making waste management a subtle but vital tool of endurance. Beyond the walls, waste influenced the surrounding landscape. Middens, heaps of refuse, grew just outside castle gates. Over time, these piles became layered records of castle life, containing broken pottery, animal bones, ash, and human waste. Farmers sometimes collected this waste to fertilize fields, blending castle refuse into the wider cycle of medieval agriculture. What nobles discarded could, in a sense, feed the peasants who served them. The use of moats as waste collectors deserves special attention. While moats offered protection against invaders, they also became repositories for sewage. Over decades, this mixture of water and filth transformed moats into stagnant, foul-smelling trenches. Enemies approaching such moats faced not only arrows and stones, but the stench and sickness of polluted waters. It was an unintentional form of biological warfare, one born from necessity rather than strategy. There were also spiritual and cultural dimensions to sanitation. Cleanliness had symbolic value, especially in spaces where lords held court or received guests. A castle's odor, or lack of it, was part of its reputation. While medieval standards of hygiene were far from modern, people still associated filth with disorder and health risks. Keeping garderobes maintained was, in its own way, an assertion of order within the harsh world of medieval life. The servants and workers who handled waste lived in the shadows of history. Gong farmers, latrine cleaners, and moat dredgers faced dangerous conditions, with the constant risk of disease or suffocation from toxic gases. Yet their work kept castles functional. These individuals rarely appear in heroic tales, but without them, the grandeur of castle life could not have been sustained. Their silent labor was as essential as the knight's sword or the mason's chisel. When we study castles today, it's easy to be drawn to the military brilliance and architectural beauty. But to understand them as living spaces, we must also confront the less glamorous aspects. Waste management shaped castle design, influenced daily routines, and revealed social hierarchies, from the lord's private garderobe to the soldier's crude latrine, from the noble's chamber pot to the servant's shovel. Every level of society interacted with sanitation in some way. Ultimately, the history of castle waste systems reminds us that beneath the pageantry and power, medieval life was profoundly human. Castles were not timeless monuments, they were lived in spaces filled with the same needs and challenges we face today. And while their methods may strike us as crude, they represent centuries of adaptation, resilience, and ingenuity. The daily life of a medieval castle revolved around order and survival. Behind the shining armor, feasts, and ceremonies, there existed a quieter but equally important concern: how to keep the castle livable amidst hundreds of people residing within its walls. Waste management, though not glamorous, was essential to the castle's very heartbeat. In larger castles, where entire households and garrisons resided, multiple garderobes were often installed. These ranged from single-seat compartments for noble families to long rows of stone benches with holes for soldiers and servants. Some castles, such as Dover Castle in England, boasted communal latrines where dozens of men could relieve themselves simultaneously. The arrangement was practical, built for efficiency rather than privacy. This shows that, despite modern ideas of personal space, medieval society was far more communal. The placement of garderobes was not random. Builders carefully positioned them along outer walls or towers, allowing waste to fall directly outside the castle structure. In some cases, shafts emptied into pits that needed periodic cleaning, while others directed filth straight down cliff sides or into running rivers. Castles near rivers often had an advantage. The flow of water carried away much of the waste, but this convenience also meant contamination, as the same rivers were often used for washing and sometimes even drinking. One striking feature of garderobe design was their secondary use as storage spaces. Historical accounts suggest that some people used these narrow, cool shafts to store valuables or food. It sounds bizarre to us, but the logic was simple. Garderobes were among the least visited and most avoided places in a castle. Hiding coins or jewelry there reduced the chance of theft. Archaeologists occasionally uncover small treasures in these shafts, proving that waste disposal areas doubled as unexpected safes. However, garderobes weren't perfect. During sieges, attackers sometimes exploited waste shafts to infiltrate castles. Soldiers could crawl up the narrow passages, enduring filth and stench, to bypass fortified gates and walls. Chronicles record desperate invaders using such routes, risking both disease and discovery. In this sense, sanitation systems were paradoxical, vital for comfort, yet vulnerable as secret doors into a castle's heart. Another fascinating element is the ritual of cleaning. Castle workers, known as gong farmers or dung collectors, had the thankless task of removing waste from pits or blocked shafts. Their work was dangerous, with constant exposure to fumes that could suffocate or cause illness. They often worked at night, when their unpleasant labor wouldn't disturb the castle's daily rhythm. Though they held one of the lowest social standings, their contribution was indispensable. Without them, castles would have become unbearable and unlivable. Waste disposal also shaped the health of castle residents. Filth was a breeding ground for pests such as rats and fleas, carriers of diseases like the plague. During outbreaks, poorly managed waste systems could amplify suffering within castle walls. Yet, in their own way, garderobes and cesspits were attempts to control this invisible enemy. They provided containment and some separation between people and their waste, a small but meaningful step in the evolution of public health. In noble households, chamber pots offered another layer of convenience. While garderobes required a walk, chamber pots allowed immediate relief, especially at night. Servants, often young boys or lower ranking workers, carried the pots to disposal areas each morning. This duty, though unpleasant, was essential for maintaining the rhythms of castle life. In a way, chamber pots symbolized the division of labor and class, comfort for the upper ranks, labor and hardship for the lower. Beyond human waste, castles had to deal with animal refuse as well. Horses, dogs, and livestock kept within castle walls produced enormous amounts of manure. This waste, unlike human excrement, was often collected for practical use. Farmers valued manure as fertilizer, and castle workers sometimes transported it to nearby fields. Thus, not all waste was wasted. Much of it re-entered the agricultural cycle, feeding the crops that sustained the very households producing it. The relationship between castles and their surrounding villages is also revealed through waste. Villagers sometimes complained about castle refuse flowing into rivers or fields. At other times, they benefited from the castle's discards, repurposing waste into fertilizer or materials. This constant exchange reminds us that castles, though imposing and independent, were deeply tied to the broader ecosystem of medieval society. The engineering behind castle waste systems reflects human adaptability. Builders who mastered stonework and defense also turned their skills towards solving everyday challenges. The shafts, pits, and waterways they designed were not just crude holes. They were part of a carefully considered infrastructure. Some castles even had rudimentary flushing systems, using rainwater or diverted streams to wash away filth. These innovations were centuries ahead of their time, showing that even in an age of swords and shields, people sought cleaner, more comfortable lives. But what of the smells? Chroniclers and travelers often remarked on the odors of medieval life. Even with garderobes, castles could be overwhelming, yet residents grew accustomed to it, their senses dulled by daily exposure. What might repulse us today was, to them, simply part of existence. Still, efforts at ventilation, water flushing, and waste management reveal that people were not indifferent. They strove to make their homes more pleasant, even within the limits of their knowledge and technology. In the end, the story of waste in castles is the story of human ingenuity in the face of necessity. It reminds us that history is not only about kings and battles, but also about servants, workers, and engineers who made life possible in crowded, complex structures. Waste management was invisible labor, yet it shaped survival, health, and comfort as much as any weapon or fortress wall. To understand how medieval castles dealt with waste, it helps to picture the daily rhythm inside their walls. At dawn, servants scurried through corridors. Nobles stirred from their chambers. Guards changed shifts, and cooks prepared meals. But alongside all this activity was another, less glamorous reality: the need to manage the filth that hundreds of people inevitably produced. At the heart of this system stood the garderobe tower. Many castles built these projections outward from the main walls, a kind of stone box jutting into the air. Inside, a narrow shaft descended straight down, allowing waste to fall clear of the building. This design kept the smell outside and reduced contamination of living quarters. Over time, castles refined this idea, constructing entire wings dedicated to sanitation. Dover Castle and Harlech Castle are examples where multiple garderobes were aligned to serve large numbers of residents. Some garderobes featured wooden seats with lids, a simple improvement that helped contain odors. Others included small ventilation slits cut into the outer wall to let fresh air circulate. These touches might seem minor, but in the enclosed world of a castle, they made a significant difference. In the depths of winter or during long sieges, when fresh air and cleanliness were scarce, even small improvements were cherished. But the system was far from foolproof. Waste often piled up at the base of shafts, creating cesspits that required regular cleaning. If neglected, these pits overflowed, spreading foul odors and attracting vermin. Rats thrived in such conditions, carrying fleas that transmitted disease. The very walls that kept enemies out sometimes trapped sickness within. Castle residents learned quickly that waste could not be ignored. It demanded constant vigilance. This vigilance fell mainly to servants and gong farmers. The lowest ranked workers, they performed the dirtiest tasks. Armed with shovels, buckets, and sheer endurance, they descended into pits to remove accumulated waste. Night was often their time of work, when others slept and their unpleasant labor disturbed fewer people. Though reviled for their smell and status, these workers were indispensable. A castle could survive without a minstrel or even a blacksmith for a short time, but without sanitation, workers' life became unbearable in days. Another layer of complexity was added during sieges. When enemies surrounded a castle, normal waste disposal broke down. Moats filled with filth faster than water could carry it away, and cesspits overflowed without the chance to be emptied. Residents improvised. Chamber pots were dumped from battlements. Waste was buried hastily, and sometimes pits were dug inside courtyards as emergency measures. The longer the siege, the more dangerous waste became. Many chroniclers note that sickness and dysentery killed more defenders than swords or arrows. Interestingly, some castles experimented with water management to aid waste disposal. Engineers diverted small streams into garderobes or pits, allowing water to flush away filth. This primitive form of plumbing was centuries ahead of its time, though it required careful construction and constant maintenance. Not every castle had the resources for such innovations, but where they existed, they revealed a remarkable blend of practicality and foresight. Moats also played a dual role in waste management. On one hand, they served as convenient receptacles. Waste poured down shafts directly into the water below, where it dispersed or stagnated. On the other hand, this practice created health hazards, especially when moats doubled as water sources. Archaeological evidence shows that moat water often teemed with bacteria and parasites, a silent threat to the very people who relied on it for defense. The moat, designed to repel invaders, became a slow, hidden danger to those inside. And yet, waste had unexpected value. Urine, for example, was collected for practical purposes. Tanners used it in preparing hides, dyers in fixing colors, and cleaners as a primitive disinfectant. Even human waste, unpleasant as it was, sometimes found use as fertilizer once sufficiently decomposed. In this sense, nothing was entirely wasted. The recycling of filth into something useful reflects the resourcefulness of medieval society, where survival demanded making the most of everything. The presence of waste systems also highlights the social hierarchy of the castle. Lords enjoyed private garderobes close to their chambers, often more carefully maintained than those used by soldiers or servants. Nobles' garderobes might even be lined with wood for comfort, while the lower ranks endured bare stone benches. Privacy, cleanliness, and comfort were luxuries, distributed according to status. Waste, though universal, still reflected the inequalities of the medieval world. Despite these inequalities, everyone in the castle shared one unavoidable reality: the smell. Chronicles often describe the pervasive odors of medieval life, from stables to kitchens to garderobes. People grew accustomed to it, their tolerance shaped by necessity. Ventilation helped, as did ash and straw scattered into cesspits, but nothing fully removed the stench. Life inside stone walls was a constant balance between endurance and adaptation. What strikes us today is how castles combined sophistication with crudeness. These structures were marvels of engineering, designed to withstand sieges and showcase wealth, yet their waste systems were simple chutes and pits. Still, within those limits, people found ways to improve and adapt, building systems that kept their communities functional for centuries. In the end, the story of waste in castles is not just about filth, it's about human resilience. It is a reminder that behind the glory of knights and kings were everyday realities managed with quiet ingenuity. Without these hidden systems, castles would have been prisons of stench rather than homes of power. When we think of medieval castles, we imagine towering walls, majestic halls, and banners fluttering in the wind. But the reality of living inside those walls was shaped just as much by daily necessities as by grandeur. Among the most important and least celebrated of these necessities was how people managed their waste. The garderobe, the medieval castle's answer to a toilet, was central to this system. At first glance, a garderobe was simple: a stone or wooden seat over a vertical shaft. But this small space tells a large story about how people adapted to their environment. For nobles, it was often placed conveniently near bedchambers, hidden within thick walls or towers. For common soldiers, it was cruder, communal, and often drafty. Regardless of class, everyone relied on these structures daily, showing how universal the need was. The very name garderobe reveals something about its place in society. Derived from French, it originally referred to a wardrobe or storage area. Over time, it also came to describe these latrine chambers, partly because clothing was sometimes hung inside them. Believe it or not, the foul air was thought to repel moths and insects, protecting valuable garments. What seems strange to us today was, for medieval people, a practical blending of two purposes. Beyond garderobes, castles also used cesspits, large underground chambers where waste collected. These pits had to be dug deep enough to contain large volumes, especially in castles with hundreds of residents. Once full, they needed to be emptied, a job that fell to gong farmers. These workers, often despised for their smell, performed an essential service. They descended into pits with buckets, shovels, and sheer determination, removing waste to be dumped or sometimes repurposed. The work was dangerous, as gases from decomposition could suffocate them, but without their labor, castle life would grind to a halt. Moats also played an unexpected role. In many castles, garderobes emptied directly into the surrounding water. At first, this seemed efficient, waste carried away, problem solved, but stagnant moats quickly became foul, breeding grounds for pests and disease. Archaeological studies reveal layers of human and animal waste preserved in moat sediments. These findings not only confirm how castles managed waste, but also offer vivid glimpses into their diets, as discarded food remains are often mixed with excrement. Yet, waste management was not solely about disposal. It was also about reuse. Urine, though unpleasant, had value. Tanneries used it to treat leather, dyers employed it to set colors, and some households even used it for cleaning. Similarly, decomposed human waste sometimes fertilized fields. Castles, despite their wealth, were part of an economy where nothing was wasted if it could serve another purpose. This practicality reminds us that medieval society was both inventive and resourceful in ways we might overlook. During sieges, waste management became a crisis. When hundreds of people were trapped inside walls, pits filled faster than they could be emptied, and chamber pots overflowed. Defenders sometimes dumped waste over battlements, creating foul conditions for attackers below. Chronicles describe sieges where disease, fueled by poor sanitation, killed more defenders than the enemy's weapons. In such moments, waste was not merely a nuisance, but a weapon, both against enemies and, tragically, against the people inside. Design innovations reveal how seriously castles took these problems. Builders sometimes angled shafts to direct waste away from foundations, preventing structural damage. Others constructed multi-level garderobes, where several floors shared the same chute, each seat stacked above the other. This design saved space, but increased the risk of accidents for those below. Imagine sitting in the lower garderobe while someone above used theirs, a reminder of how medieval practicality could clash with comfort. Sanitation also reflected the social hierarchy. Lords' garderobes were better maintained, closer to living quarters, and sometimes even decorated. Soldiers and servants, meanwhile, used communal facilities that offered little privacy. This inequality extended to maintenance. Servants cleaned noble garderobes regularly, while common ones often reeked from neglect. Waste management, in its own way, mirrored the divisions of medieval society. What about the smells? Even with precautions like ash, straw, or ventilation slits, castles were filled with odors. People were used to it, their senses dulled by constant exposure. To us, it would be overwhelming, but to them, it was daily life. And yet, their efforts to manage smells, through lids, ventilation, and cleaning, show they cared deeply about improving comfort within their means. One detail, often overlooked, is that waste shafts sometimes became weak points in castle defenses. Invaders occasionally crawled up these narrow passages, braving the filth to bypass gates and walls. While rare, these stories reveal how sanitation, designed for daily life, could inadvertently shape military strategy. In this sense, garderobes were not just toilets, they were part of the castle's strengths and weaknesses. Ultimately, the story of waste in castles is a story of survival. It's about how people lived together in crowded stone fortresses, balancing grandeur with practicality. Waste management was invisible work, carried out by lowly servants and laborers, but without it, the castles we admire today would never have endured. And so, when we marvel at castles, their towers, halls, and legends, we should also remember the unseen systems that kept them alive. Behind every feast in a great hall, and every knight's tale, was a garderobe, a cesspit, or a gong farmer, ensuring that life inside those mighty walls could carry on. If you're fascinated by these hidden details of medieval life, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more untold stories of history's everyday struggles. In the grand design of medieval castles, nothing was left to chance. Walls were built for defense, towers for vigilance, and halls for ceremony. Yet just as important, though less often mentioned, were the systems that dealt with human waste. Without them, even the strongest fortress would collapse under its own filth. At the center of this story is the garderobe, that simple but ingenious chamber built into castle walls. To use one, a person would sit on a stone or wooden bench with a hole carved into it. Beneath, a chute carried the waste down and away, usually into a pit, a river, or a moat. The design was straightforward, but it reflected a deep awareness of necessity. Even kings and queens could not ignore the call of nature, and so garderobes became an inseparable part of castle architecture. The variety of garderobes across Europe shows how different regions adapted the same idea. In wetter climates, shafts often emptied directly into flowing water, reducing smells and cleaning themselves naturally. In drier areas, cesspits were more common, dug deep beneath the walls and covered with stone. These pits needed emptying, and this task fell to some of the lowest workers in society, the gong farmers. With shovels, buckets, and sheer endurance, they removed waste by night, carrying it outside the walls. Their work was filthy and dangerous, but without them, castle life would soon become intolerable. The architecture of garderobes reveals both practicality and vulnerability. Many were built into small towers, projecting outward, a design that kept smells away from the living quarters. But these same projections sometimes became weak points in defense. Chroniclers record sieges where attackers crept up garderobe shafts to infiltrate castles, enduring filth to bypass heavily guarded gates. Sanitation, meant for comfort, could inadvertently threaten security. Life in the castle required balance. Hundreds of people, lords, ladies, knights, servants, and animals, produce vast amounts of waste. Chamber pots added to the challenge. Nobles often used them at night or in cold weather, leaving servants to empty them in the morning. These servants carried waste to cesspits, middens, or directly outside the walls. Their daily routines remind us that the comforts of the elite rested on the constant, unseen labor of others. Moats, too, were double-edged tools. They served as barriers against invaders, but also as dumping grounds for waste. At first, this seemed efficient. The water carried filth away, but stagnant moats quickly became foul, breeding insects and spreading disease. Archaeological digs around moats reveal not only human waste, but animal dung, food scraps, and broken objects, all preserved in the muck. These layers give us a clearer picture of castle life, showing the mixture of grandeur and grime that defined the medieval world. And yet, medieval people did not see waste only as a problem. Urine and manure had uses. Urine was collected for tanning leather, fixing dyes, and cleaning fabrics. Animal manure fertilized fields. Even human waste once decomposed, could enrich soil. In a society where resources were scarce and survival depended on ingenuity, nothing went entirely to waste. What disgusts us today was, for them, part of a cycle that sustained life. The social hierarchy of sanitation is another revealing detail. Lords enjoyed private garderobes, often better built, ventilated, and maintained than those used by common soldiers. Servants cleaned noble facilities regularly, while communal ones for the lower ranks were often neglected. This division reflects a broader truth, even in something as universal as relieving oneself. Medieval society drew clear lines between privilege and hardship. Smells, of course, were unavoidable. To reduce them, ash or straw was sprinkled into cesspits, absorbing moisture and masking odors. Some castles built small ventilation shafts, while others designed garderobes with lids to trap the stench. These modest solutions show that medieval people were not indifferent. They cared about hygiene and comfort within their limits. Their world may not have been as sanitized as ours, but they were far from careless. During sieges, waste became a serious challenge. Trapped inside walls, residents had few options. Cesspits filled quickly, chamber pots overflowed, and garderobe shafts clogged. Defenders sometimes dumped waste directly onto attackers, turning filth into a weapon. Chronicles describe armies weakened not by swords, but by dysentery and plague, spread through contaminated water and poor sanitation. In these moments, waste became as powerful an enemy as the besieging force. The ingenuity of castle builders is seen in the few examples of early flushing systems. In rare cases, rainwater or diverted streams flowed through garderobe shafts, washing waste away. These systems required skill and maintenance, but they reveal a constant drive to improve living conditions, even within the harsh stone walls of a fortress. When we step back, what emerges is not just a story about waste, but about resilience. Castles were more than military structures. They were living communities, home to hundreds of people and animals. Their survival depended not only on walls and weapons, but on the quiet, often invisible work of managing filth. Without garderobes, cesspits, and gong farmers, the castles we admire today might never have lasted. And so, the next time we picture a medieval feast in a great hall, or knights preparing for battle, we should also remember the garderobe tucked into the wall, the servant emptying a chamber pot, or the gong farmer shoveling waste in the dark. Their unglamorous labor was the foundation upon which grandeur was built. When we imagine medieval castles, we think of towers, banners, and knights in shining armor. But behind the grandeur, there was another world, a world of smells, chores, and constant challenges. At the heart of that hidden reality was one essential question. How do you manage waste inside a fortress of stone? The answer lay in clever design, hard labor, and a surprising amount of improvisation. Castles were not just strongholds, they were bustling communities where lords, soldiers, servants, and animals lived together. Every day, hundreds of people needed food, water, and sanitation. Without careful planning, the very walls that protected them could turn into a prison of filth. The garderobe was the most recognizable feature of castle sanitation. Built directly into the walls, often in small protruding towers, garderobes allowed waste to fall down a vertical shaft. Depending on the location, it might land in a cesspit, into a flowing river, or into the moat. The principle was simple. Keep waste out of the living quarters and let gravity do the work. But garderobes were far from luxurious. They were often drafty, smelly, and cold, especially in winter. In some castles, multiple garderobes lined the outer walls, their chutes side by side like a row of primitive plumbing. Some even included wooden seats with lids, an early attempt to improve comfort. Yet for all their flaws, they were practical, and every major castle had them. Then there were chamber pots, used by nobles and servants alike. At night or during storms, few wanted to trek to a garderobe tower. Instead, they used pots, later emptied by castle staff. These staff members, usually the lowest ranking servants, carried waste to pits or threw it beyond the walls. It was an unpleasant job, but essential to daily life. Beneath castles, cesspits stored waste until it could be removed. Some were lined with stone, others with wood. Over time, they filled, and then came the task of emptying them. Enter the gong farmers, the unsung workers of sanitation. By night, with lanterns, shovels, and buckets, they climbed into cesspits and shoveled out the thick sludge. It was backbreaking, dangerous work, but necessary. Without them, castles would have been overwhelmed by their own refuse. Moats added another layer of complexity. While primarily designed for defense, moats were often used as waste dumps. Garderobe chutes emptied directly into them, along with animal waste and discarded scraps. Initially, the moving water could carry waste away, but in stagnant moats, the filth simply collected. Mosquitoes bred, smells worsened, and disease spread. Archaeologists still uncover layers of medieval waste in dried moats, a reminder of their dual purpose as both barrier and sewer. The social divide extended even here. Lords had private garderobes, sometimes richly decorated and better ventilated. Servants and soldiers used communal facilities, often poorly maintained. Just as fine food and soft beds separated nobles from commoners, so too did the quality of their toilets. Even in waste management, class dictated comfort, yet medieval people were resourceful. Waste wasn't always discarded, it was reused. Urine was collected in barrels for tanning leather, bleaching fabrics, or producing saltpeter for gunpowder. Manure fertilized fields, essential for agriculture. Human waste, when decomposed, sometimes found its way back to farmland. What we might consider disgusting was, for them, part of an economic cycle. Sanitation became especially critical during sieges. When enemies surrounded the walls, castle residents had to survive with limited water and food. Waste disposal became a nightmare. Overflowing cesspits and chamber pots threatened health, while garderobe shafts clogged with overuse. Defenders sometimes turned waste into a weapon, hurling filth or pouring it onto attackers. But more often, disease spread within the walls, weakening defenders long before swords could. History records sieges where dysentery and plague decided the outcome more than battle itself. Despite the challenges, castle architects showed ingenuity. In a few advanced examples, garderobes were built with running water systems. Rainwater or diverted streams washed waste away, reducing buildup. Some shafts were sloped to direct flow into nearby rivers. While rare, these innovations show how medieval builders constantly sought improvements, even in sanitation. The smell of castles, however, could never be entirely erased. To reduce odors, ash, straw, or herbs were scattered into pits. Some households burned incense or hung sweet-smelling plants near garderobes. Even so, the stench was unavoidable. Travelers often described castles as both majestic and foul, a blend of glory and grime that defined the Middle Ages. And yet, this hidden world tells us as much about medieval life as any banquet or battle. Waste management reveals the everyday struggles of ordinary people, the hierarchy of privilege, and the ingenuity of survival. Castles were not only fortresses of power, but also living, breathing communities where every detail mattered, including where to relieve oneself. Today, we walk through castle ruins and marvel at the walls, towers, and halls. But tucked into corners, often overlooked, are the remains of garderobes and cesspits. They are reminders that history is not only about kings and knights, it is also about gong farmers, servants, and the invisible work that made life possible. So, the next time you picture a medieval lord in shining armor, imagine too the servant carrying a chamber pot, or the gong farmer climbing into a cesspit at midnight. These unglamorous tasks kept castles habitable. Without them, the story of medieval castles would be one not of power and prestige, but of decay and disease. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden side of medieval castles, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are countless more forgotten stories of history waiting to be told, and you won't want to miss them. In the shadowed corridors and towering walls of medieval castles, life moved in rhythms dictated by both grandeur and necessity. While feasts, jousts, and ceremonies filled the great halls with spectacle, behind the scenes, survival depended on far humbler systems. Chief among these was waste management, a silent, often unpleasant backbone of castle life. The garderobe remained the centerpiece of sanitation. Even in castles with dozens of rooms and hundreds of residents, each tower or wing was carefully planned to include a number of these small latrine chambers. Their placement was strategic, protruding from outer walls or atop natural slopes, ensuring that waste fell away from living quarters. These vertical shafts varied in design, some emptying into pits, others into streams or moats, yet all shared the same purpose: to remove filth as efficiently as possible. While the nobles enjoyed privacy, comfort, and even wood-lined seats, the soldiers and servants relied on communal benches. These long rows of stone, punctuated by holes, allowed many people to relieve themselves simultaneously. The experience was practical, but lacked discretion. Privacy was a luxury few could afford, and the castle's walls echoed not only with laughter, clanking armor, and the songs of minstrels, but also with the sounds of the less glamorous necessities of life. Daily cleaning routines were as vital as any guard shift. Gong farmers, the specialized workers, tasked with removing waste from cesspits and garderobe shafts, operated mostly at night. Armed with lanterns, shovels, and buckets, they descended into the depths of the castle's refuse system, risking noxious fumes, disease, and injury. Their work was unpleasant and often reviled, yet it allowed the grand halls above to function smoothly. In essence, the survival of castle society relied on their invisible labor. Moats, too, played an integral role in waste management. While primarily defensive, moats became reservoirs for both human and animal waste. Freshwater flow could carry away some filth, but stagnant sections often became breeding grounds for mosquitoes and disease. Archaeological excavations reveal a layered history of refuse in these water-filled trenches: animal bones, food scraps, broken tools, and human excrement, preserved over centuries. For historians, these layers are treasure troves, providing vivid insights into diets, domestic practices, and the daily challenges of castle life. Beyond the obvious, waste in castles was not merely discarded, it was repurposed. Urine, for instance, was collected for leather tanning, dyeing fabrics, and sometimes even for chemical preparations like saltpeter. Manure from horses, cattle, and chickens fertilized surrounding fields. Over time, even human waste could contribute to agriculture. In a society where resources were precious, nothing went entirely unused. What may seem revolting today was, for medieval people, a practical resource integrated into the broader economy. The risk of disease was always present. Castles, despite their stone walls and defensive moats, could become breeding grounds for pests and bacteria. Poorly maintained pits, clogged shafts, and stagnant moats facilitated the spread of dysentery, cholera, and other infections. Siege conditions exacerbated the problem. With hundreds confined within walls, sanitation routines broke down, and waste could accumulate dangerously fast. Chroniclers often note that during long sieges, more defenders died from disease than from battle injuries. The engineering ingenuity of medieval builders is evident in their sanitation systems. Some castles featured angled shafts to direct waste away from foundations, preserving structural integrity. Others incorporated primitive flushing mechanisms, using rainwater or diverted streams to carry waste into rivers. Even the simplest stone pits were carefully constructed to last decades. While they lacked modern plumbing, these innovations show a sophisticated understanding of human needs, hygiene, and environmental management. Social hierarchies played out clearly in sanitation. Lords and ladies enjoyed private garderobes, often closer to their chambers, sometimes even with wooden seats or covers to reduce odors. Soldiers, servants, and common residents were relegated to communal facilities. Beyond mere convenience, this reflected the rigid divisions of medieval life. Comfort and privacy were privileges, and sanitation was another indicator of status. Odors, of course, were unavoidable. Even with ash, straw, and ventilation shafts, the scent of waste lingered. Herbs, flowers, or incense were occasionally used to mask smells, particularly in noble quarters. Despite these efforts, the stench of daily life was inescapable. It shaped behaviors, dictated room arrangements, and influenced architectural choices, revealing the profound ways in which sanitation affected the lived experience of medieval people. The dual nature of waste systems, as essential but potentially dangerous, is also fascinating. Garderobe shafts, while crucial for comfort, could become hazards. Stories exist of sieges where attackers tried to exploit these narrow passages to infiltrate castles. While rare, such incidents illustrate how even basic human necessities could intersect with defense strategy. Similarly, the overflow of waste into moats could become a defensive deterrent, making approaches hazardous for enemies. Ultimately, the story of waste management in castles is a story of adaptation and resilience. The same walls that hosted grand feasts, royal courts, and military councils also concealed the daily realities of human biology, from chamber pots to cesspits, from garderobe towers to moat systems. Every element was designed to maintain life in crowded stone fortresses. These systems remind us that history is not only about glory and conquest, but also about the ingenuity that allowed communities to survive under challenging conditions. Life inside a medieval castle was a constant balancing act between grandeur and practicality. While the great halls echoed with music, feasts, and political discourse, behind the walls, the mundane realities of daily existence demanded careful management. Chief among these realities was the need to handle human and animal waste, a challenge that shaped both architecture and everyday life. The garderobe, often a small stone chamber built into a protruding tower, was the cornerstone of castle sanitation. Designed to drop waste away from living spaces, these vertical shafts were remarkably efficient for their time. Nobles often had private garderobes adjacent to their chambers, while soldiers and servants shared communal rows. Despite their practicality, these spaces were far from comfortable, drafty, cold, and often smelly, but they were essential for survival. Maintenance of these facilities fell to gong farmers, the unsung heroes of sanitation. These specialized workers descended into cesspits and emptied shafts, carrying waste away under cover of darkness. The work was grueling and hazardous. The risk of disease and injury was high, yet, without their labor, life inside the castle would have been unbearable. Their existence highlights a critical truth. Castles depended not only on fortifications and weaponry, but also on the quiet, essential work of laborers operating behind the scenes. Moats were another integral component of castle hygiene. While serving primarily as defensive structures, moats often doubled as receptacles for waste. Garderobe chutes frequently emptied directly into these water-filled trenches, along with animal waste and discarded scraps. Flowing water helped carry away some filth, but stagnant sections created breeding grounds for mosquitoes and bacteria. Archaeological digs reveal layers of waste preserved in moat sediments, offering historians insights into the diets, domestic habits, and sanitation practices of medieval inhabitants. Reuse of waste was a hallmark of medieval ingenuity. Urine, for example, was collected for tanning leather, fixing dyes, and chemical processes. Animal manure fertilized surrounding fields, enhancing agricultural productivity. Even human waste, when properly decomposed, could enrich soil. In a world where resources were limited and survival required ingenuity, nothing went entirely to waste. Medieval society turned even its unpleasant byproducts into practical resources. Disease was a constant threat. Castles, despite their stone walls, were densely populated and vulnerable to the spread of infection. Overflowing cesspits, clogged shafts, and stagnant moats could accelerate outbreaks of dysentery, cholera, and other illnesses. Siege conditions intensified the problem. Confined populations, limited water, and disrupted waste disposal led to catastrophic consequences. Historical records note that more defenders often perished from disease than from battle injuries during prolonged sieges. The architecture of waste management was both practical and sophisticated. Some castles incorporated angled shafts to direct waste away from foundations, preserving structural integrity. Others employed rudimentary flushing systems, using rainwater or diverted streams to carry refuse into rivers. While primitive by modern standards, these innovations demonstrate a careful consideration of hygiene, architecture, and environmental factors. Social hierarchy was evident even in sanitation. Lords and ladies had private facilities, better maintained and positioned for convenience. Soldiers and servants relied on communal garderobes, often less ventilated and maintained. Chamber pots were carried by servants to disposal areas, a task that reinforced social divisions while ensuring the smooth functioning of the household. Comfort and cleanliness, like food and clothing, reflected privilege. Odors were an inescapable aspect of life in a castle. Even with ash, straw, and ventilation shafts, the smell of waste lingered. Herbs, flowers, and incense were occasionally used to mask unpleasant scents in noble quarters. Nevertheless, residents grew accustomed to it, adjusting their daily routines around unavoidable smells. This olfactory reality shaped the design of living spaces, the placement of garderobes, and the flow of daily life. Waste management also intersected with defense. While garderobes improved sanitation, they could become vulnerabilities. Narrow shafts were occasionally exploited during sieges, allowing attackers to bypass gates. Similarly, overflowing waste could inadvertently create hazards for residents or attackers. Thus, sanitation was not merely a domestic concern, it was a factor in castle security and strategy. The story of medieval waste systems is ultimately a story of adaptation. Castles were more than fortresses, they were living, functioning communities. Walls, towers, and moats provided protection, but the unseen systems of waste management ensured that life could continue within them. Chamber pots, cesspits, garderobes, and moats formed an interconnected network essential for the survival, health, and comfort of residents. This hidden world also reveals the ingenuity of medieval engineers. Within the constraints of available materials and knowledge, they designed systems that balanced practicality, hygiene, and defense. From angled chutes to primitive flushing mechanisms, castles incorporated innovative solutions to one of life's most persistent challenges. Their work ensured that while knights fought and lords feasted, the less glamorous but vital processes of daily life continued without disruption. In conclusion, sanitation in medieval castles was far more than an inconvenience. It was a cornerstone of survival. From the grandeur of the great halls to the narrow depths of cesspits, every aspect of castle life depended on effective waste management. Without it, the mighty fortresses of the Middle Ages would have crumbled under their own filth, rather than withstanding the sieges of enemy armies. Inside medieval castles, life was a delicate dance between defense, comfort, and survival. While kings, queens, and knights occupied grand halls and chambers, the daily realities of waste management shaped the living conditions for everyone within the walls. Without careful planning, even the strongest fortress could quickly become uninhabitable. The garderobe remained the primary method for disposing of human waste, positioned strategically along outer walls or in protruding towers. These stone or wooden chambers allowed waste to fall safely away from living areas. Nobles enjoyed private garderobes near their chambers, sometimes with wooden seats or lids, while soldiers and servants relied on communal rows. Despite their simplicity, garderobes reflected a balance of practicality and ingenuity, ensuring that life could continue smoothly within the stone walls. Cesspits provided storage for waste collected from garderobes or chamber pots. Some were lined with stone, others with wood, but all required regular maintenance. Gong farmers, working mostly at night, risked their health to empty these pits, descending into the depths with shovels, buckets, and lanterns. They removed waste, ensuring that the castle remained habitable. Their work was critical, yet invisible, forming the foundation for the grander aspects of castle life. Moats were both defensive and functional. Garderobe shafts often emptied into these water-filled trenches, carrying away human and animal waste. Flowing sections helped disperse filth, but stagnant areas became breeding grounds for insects and disease. Archaeological studies reveal preserved layers of refuse, offering insight into the diets, domestic routines, and living conditions of medieval inhabitants. These remnants remind us that behind the glory of castles lay a persistent struggle to manage daily necessities. Waste was not merely discarded, it was repurposed. Urine was valuable for tanning leather, fixing dyes, or producing chemicals like saltpeter. Manure fertilized fields and gardens, supporting agriculture and sustaining the castle community. Even human excrement, when properly decomposed, contributed to crop growth. Medieval society's approach to waste demonstrates resourcefulness and adaptability, turning unpleasant byproducts into useful resources. Disease was ever present. Overcrowding, overflowing cesspits, and stagnant moats increased the spread of dysentery, cholera, and other infections. During sieges, sanitation problems worsened dramatically. Chamber pots overflowed, pits filled beyond capacity, and garderobe shafts clogged. Chroniclers report that disease often killed more defenders than the enemy's weapons, highlighting the essential role of waste management in medieval survival. Castle builders showed remarkable engineering skill in their sanitation systems. Shafts were sometimes angled to protect foundations, and in rare cases, rudimentary flushing mechanisms used rainwater or diverted streams to carry waste into rivers. Even small touches, like ventilation slits or wooden lids, improved comfort and hygiene. These innovations reveal how necessity drove creativity, even in areas often overlooked in historical accounts. Social hierarchy was evident in sanitation. Lords and ladies had better facilities, often maintained and cleaned regularly by servants. Soldiers and common workers relied on communal garderobes, sometimes poorly ventilated or located in exposed areas. Even chamber pots were emptied by the lowest ranking servants. Waste management mirrored broader social divisions, demonstrating that privilege extended even to matters of hygiene. Odors were unavoidable, shaping the daily experience of castle inhabitants. Ash, straw, and herbs were used to reduce smells, while ventilation and careful placement of garderobes helped contain them. Yet, the pervasive stench influenced room arrangements, travel through the castle, and even daily schedules. Smell was an invisible, ever-present factor in medieval life, demonstrating that sanitation was more than functional. It was central to comfort. During sieges, waste became both a hazard and a tool. Overflowing pits threatened defenders, while waste could be thrown upon attackers, serving as a form of improvised defense. These moments reveal how sanitation intersected with strategy. Waste management was not simply domestic, it was an essential aspect of survival, public health, and even warfare. Even the simplest technologies, like angled garderobe shafts, demonstrate medieval ingenuity. Builders considered gravity, materials, and ventilation to maintain usability over time. Moats and pits functioned not only for defense and storage, but also as early indicators of environmental management, revealing how people adapted to their surroundings. Castles were more than symbols of power. They were bustling centers of daily life, while chroniclers often focus on battles, feasts, and royal intrigue. The unseen world of sanitation played an equally vital role in sustaining these stone fortresses. Without effective waste management, the very walls designed to protect inhabitants could become hazardous. The garderobe was central to this system. These latrine chambers were ingeniously built into outer walls, towers, or protrusions, ensuring that waste fell away from living areas. For nobles, private garderobes were conveniently located near sleeping quarters, sometimes furnished with wooden seats or covers. Soldiers and servants, in contrast, used communal benches, practical but far less comfortable. The design of these facilities demonstrates a balance of necessity and ingenuity, allowing large numbers of people to relieve themselves while minimizing health risks. Maintenance fell to gong farmers, whose work was essential to castle hygiene. Descending into cesspits at night with shovels and buckets, they removed waste that had accumulated from garderobes, chamber pots, and other sources. The job was dangerous and unpleasant, exposing workers to disease and toxic gases. Despite their low social status, these laborers were critical to the survival of castle communities. Without their efforts, inhabitants would face unbearable conditions and rapid spread of illness. Moats played a dual role. Primarily defensive, they also served as repositories for waste. Garderobe shafts often emptied directly into these water-filled trenches, carrying human and animal refuse away from the castle walls. Flowing moats could disperse waste, but stagnant water quickly became a breeding ground for mosquitoes and bacteria. Archaeological excavations reveal layered deposits of organic matter, bones, and refuse, providing historians with detailed insights into medieval diets, domestic routines, and the realities of castle sanitation. Waste was not simply discarded, it was repurposed whenever possible. Urine was collected for tanning leather, setting dyes, and chemical processes, including the creation of saltpeter for early gunpowder. Animal manure enriched fields and gardens, supporting agriculture and sustaining livestock. Human excrement, once decomposed, sometimes fertilized crops. In a world without modern fertilizers or chemical treatments, these practices reflect remarkable resourcefulness and practicality. Disease was a constant threat. Overcrowded quarters, overflowing cesspits, and poor ventilation facilitated the spread of infections like dysentery, cholera, and typhoid. Siege conditions worsened these problems, with confined populations, limited water supplies, and clogged waste systems leading to outbreaks. Historical records suggest that in many sieges, disease claimed more lives than combat, illustrating the centrality of sanitation to medieval survival. Castle builders demonstrated significant engineering skill in sanitation. Some designed angled shafts to prevent structural damage, while others created rudimentary flushing systems using rainwater or diverted streams. Even small details, such as wooden lids, straw, or ventilation slits, improved the comfort and usability of garderobes. These innovations highlight the medieval ability to solve practical problems within the constraints of materials, knowledge, and social organization. Social hierarchy influenced access to sanitation. Nobles enjoyed private, well-maintained garderobes, while soldiers and servants used communal facilities, often located in exposed or poorly ventilated areas. Even chamber pots were emptied by lower-ranking staff. This division reflects broader societal structures, demonstrating that privilege extended even into hygiene practices. Odors were unavoidable, shaping the day-to-day experience of castle residents. Ash, straw, and herbs helped reduce smells, while ventilation shafts allowed some circulation. Noble quarters occasionally employed fragrant plants or incense to mask unpleasant scents. Despite these measures, the pervasive stench influenced room placement, movement through the castle, and even daily schedules. Smell was an omnipresent, yet often overlooked aspect of medieval life. Waste management also intersected with defense and strategy. Overcrowded or overflowing facilities could create hazards during sieges, while waste thrown on attackers served as an improvised weapon. Even narrow garderobe shafts occasionally became entry points for intruders. This dual nature, both protective and potentially dangerous, underscores the complex relationship between sanitation and survival in medieval castles. In addition to functionality, sanitation was tied to medieval ingenuity and problem solving. Builders considered gravity, drainage, and ventilation when designing garderobes, moats, and cesspits. Simple innovations allowed castles to accommodate hundreds of residents while minimizing health risks. These solutions highlight a practical intelligence often overlooked in historical narratives that focus solely on battles or royal power. Ultimately, the story of waste in castles is a story of resilience and adaptation. From chamber pots to garderobes, from cesspits to moats, every element of the sanitation system was designed to support life within stone walls. Without it, even the grandest castles would have failed to sustain their communities. The invisible work of servants, laborers, and engineers ensured that daily life could continue, even in the harshest conditions. In medieval castles, life was both magnificent and grueling. Grand halls and towers symbolized power, yet behind the stone walls, residents faced everyday challenges that were far less glamorous. Chief among these challenges was waste management, a concern as vital as the castle's defenses or supply systems. Without proper sanitation, even the strongest fortress could be rendered uninhabitable. The garderobe served as the cornerstone of castle hygiene. These small latrine chambers, often built into outer walls or towers, allowed waste to drop safely away from living areas. For nobles, private garderobes offered convenience and relative comfort, sometimes equipped with wooden seats or lids. Soldiers and servants relied on communal benches, practical but far less comfortable. This design demonstrates the careful thought given to functionality, balancing human needs with architectural limitations. Maintenance of these systems was critical. Gong farmers, specialized workers, carried the burden of emptying cesspits and clearing waste from garderobe shafts. Working mostly at night, they used shovels, buckets, and lanterns to remove waste, facing foul smells, hazardous gases, and the constant risk of disease. Their labor was essential to castle life, ensuring that the grand halls above could function without being overwhelmed by filth. Moats also played a dual role in sanitation. While primarily defensive, they often acted as natural waste disposal systems. Garderobe shafts frequently emptied into moats, along with animal excrement and discarded scraps. Flowing water carried some of the waste away, but stagnant sections became breeding grounds for insects and disease. Archaeological studies reveal layers of refuse preserved in moats, including animal bones, food remnants, and human waste. offering invaluable insights into medieval diets, domestic practices, and daily routines. Waste in medieval castles was rarely wasted. Urine, for example, was collected for leather tanning, fabric dyeing, and chemical processes, including the production of saltpeter for early firearms, manure, fertilized fields and gardens, sustaining crops and livestock. Human waste, once properly decomposed, could enrich agricultural land. These practices illustrate the resourcefulness of medieval society, turning seemingly unpleasant materials into essential resources. Health and disease were constant concerns. Overcrowding, clogged cesspits, and poorly maintained garderobes contributed to the spread of illnesses such as dysentery, cholera, and typhoid. During sieges, these problems intensified, with waste accumulating rapidly and sanitation routines breaking down. Chroniclers often noted that disease killed more defenders than enemy attacks, underscoring the vital role of effective waste management in medieval survival. Castle builders showed remarkable engineering skill. Garderobe shafts were angled to prevent damage to walls and foundations. Some castles employed rudimentary flushing systems, using rainwater or diverted streams to carry waste away. Wooden lids, straw, and ventilation shafts were small but effective measures to improve comfort and hygiene. These innovations reflect a sophisticated understanding of human needs, environment, and practical problem solving. Social hierarchy shaped access to sanitation. Nobles enjoyed private, well maintained facilities, while soldiers and servants relied on communal garderobes that were less convenient and often less sanitary. Chamber pots were emptied by lower ranking staff, reinforcing social divisions while maintaining the daily functioning of the castle. Sanitation, like clothing, food, and shelter, reflected social standing and privilege. Odors permeated castle life, even with ash, straw, ventilation, and herbs. The smell of waste was ever present. In noble quarters, fragrant plants or incense might mask odors, but the stench remained noticeable. These conditions influenced room placement, daily movement, and even social interaction, demonstrating how sanitation shaped the lived experience of medieval people. During sieges, waste management became a matter of survival and strategy. Overflowing pits and clogged shafts threatened defenders' health, while waste could also be used offensively against attackers. Narrow garderobe shafts occasionally served as infiltration points for enemy soldiers. In this way, sanitation intersected with defense, illustrating that managing human waste was both a domestic and military concern. The ingenuity of medieval engineers is evident in even the simplest sanitation solutions. By considering gravity, drainage, and ventilation, they created systems that allowed hundreds of people to live within stone walls, from garderobes to cesspits, from chamber pots to moats. Each component worked together to maintain life in challenging conditions. These innovations highlight the resourcefulness and practical intelligence of medieval societies, often overshadowed by tales of knights and kings. Ultimately, the story of waste in castles is a story of adaptation, resilience, and survival. Grand architecture, fortified walls, and strategic defenses depended on the quiet, unseen labor of those who managed the castle's filth. The effectiveness of these systems determined not just comfort, but life itself, ensuring that castles could function as thriving communities rather than collapsing under their own refuse. Medieval castles were marvels of architecture, power, and design, yet their survival depended on far more mundane systems than walls, gates, or armories. Chief among these systems was waste management, a vital component of daily life. While knights trained, lords feasted, and heralds delivered messages, the unseen labor of managing human and animal waste kept these stone fortresses functional and habitable. The garderobe was the cornerstone of sanitation, positioned in strategic locations, often in towers or projecting walls. It allowed waste to fall safely away from living areas. Nobles enjoyed private garderobes near their chambers, sometimes outfitted with wooden seats, while soldiers and servants used communal benches. Although basic by modern standards, the design minimized health risks and demonstrated a keen understanding of functionality within architectural constraints. Cesspits complemented garderobes by storing waste safely. Some were lined with stone, others with wood, and all required regular cleaning. Enter the gong farmers, the often overlooked heroes of castle sanitation. Working mostly at night, they descended into cesspits and removed waste with shovels and buckets, exposing themselves to foul odors, disease, and danger. Their work was essential. Without it, castles would become uninhabitable, no matter how strong their walls or how large their armies. Moats served a dual purpose. While defensive, they also acted as natural waste repositories. Garderobe shafts often emptied directly into moats, along with animal excrement and discarded food scraps. Flowing water carried some waste away, but stagnant sections became breeding grounds for insects and disease. Archaeological excavations reveal layers of preserved waste, offering historians insight into medieval diets, domestic habits, and the constant struggle for cleanliness. Waste was not merely discarded, it was repurposed. Urine was used for tanning leather, fixing dyes, and even producing chemicals like saltpeter. Manure fertilized gardens and fields, sustaining crops and livestock. Human waste, when decomposed, sometimes returned to farmland. These practices reflect the resourcefulness of medieval communities, where even the most unpleasant materials became essential for survival. Health concerns were ever present. Overcrowding, clogged shafts, and poorly maintained garderobes facilitated the spread of diseases such as dysentery, cholera, and typhoid. During sieges, sanitation became critical. Waste accumulated rapidly, water sources became contaminated, and hygiene practices broke down. Chroniclers often note that disease killed more defenders than attacks, highlighting the importance of effective waste management in medieval survival. Castle engineers demonstrated remarkable ingenuity. Shafts were angled to protect walls and foundations. Rudimentary flushing systems sometimes employed rainwater, and wooden lids or straw helped improve hygiene. These designs reveal a sophisticated understanding of physics, health, and practicality, allowing castles to sustain large populations despite the constraints of the era. Social hierarchy strongly influenced sanitation. Nobles had private facilities maintained regularly by servants, while soldiers and lower ranking staff relied on communal garderobes. Even chamber pots were emptied by lower ranking servants. These arrangements reinforced social structures. Comfort and hygiene were privileges, and sanitation mirrored broader societal divisions. Odors permeated castle life. Even with ash, straw, herbs, or ventilation shafts, the smell of waste was unavoidable. Noble quarters sometimes employed fragrant plants or incense to mask odors, but the stench remained noticeable. Residents adapted their daily routines, room arrangements, and movements through the castle around these realities, showing how sanitation shaped medieval life in subtle but profound ways. During sieges, waste became a matter of survival and strategy. Overflowing pits threatened defenders' health, while waste could also be used offensively against attackers. Narrow garderobe shafts occasionally served as infiltration points. Sanitation intersected with both domestic life and defense, illustrating its central importance in medieval castles. The story of waste management also reflects adaptation and problem solving. Builders considered gravity, ventilation, and drainage, creating systems that allowed hundreds to live safely within stone walls. From garderobes to cesspits, chamber pots to moats, each component worked in tandem, ensuring functionality and comfort under challenging conditions. The grandeur of medieval castles often conceals the daily challenges faced by their inhabitants. While the halls echoed with the clatter of feasts, the ceremonies of nobility, and the planning of battles, an unseen yet critical system sustained life within the walls. Waste management. Without it, even the mightiest fortress could quickly become unlivable. The garderobe was central to this system. These latrine chambers were built into walls or towers, often extending beyond the structure to allow waste to fall away from living quarters. Nobles had private garderobes near their chambers, offering convenience and relative comfort, while soldiers and servants relied on communal benches. The design prioritized practicality, leveraging gravity to remove waste while minimizing contamination and disease. Cesspits complemented garderobes by storing waste safely. Some were simple pits lined with wood, while others were stone-lined and carefully engineered to last decades. The crucial task of emptying these pits fell to gong farmers, who worked at night to avoid the notice of the castle's residents. With shovels, buckets, and lanterns, they removed waste, often in dangerous and unsanitary conditions. Their labor, though hidden and stigmatized, was essential to maintaining the castle's hygiene and health. Moats often served a dual purpose. While their primary role was defensive, they frequently acted as repositories for waste. Garderobe shafts, along with animal excrement and discarded scraps, emptied into these water-filled trenches. Flowing sections could carry waste away, but stagnant areas quickly became breeding grounds for disease and insects. Excavations of moats reveal layered deposits of refuse, offering a vivid snapshot of daily life, diets, and domestic practices in medieval castles. Recycling of waste was a critical practice. Urine was collected for tanning leather, fixing dyes, and chemical uses such as saltpeter production. Animal manure fertilized crops and gardens, supporting food production within castle estates. Human waste, once properly decomposed, sometimes returned to fields as fertilizer. Medieval communities demonstrated remarkable resourcefulness, converting materials often considered repulsive into essential resources for survival. Health was a constant concern. Overcrowded quarters, clogged shafts, and stagnant moats facilitated the spread of disease. Outbreaks of dysentery, cholera, and typhoid were common, especially during sieges. With limited water and overused sanitation systems, disease could decimate the castle population before an enemy even breached the walls. Historical accounts frequently note that illness claimed more lives than combat during prolonged conflicts, highlighting the critical importance of sanitation. Castle architects and engineers displayed impressive problem solving skills. Garderobe shafts were angled to protect foundations, wooden lids and ventilation slits improved comfort, and some castles even incorporated rudimentary flushing systems using rainwater or diverted streams. These designs illustrate a practical intelligence that ensured functional living conditions despite the limitations of medieval technology. Social hierarchy influenced access to sanitation. Nobles enjoyed private, well maintained facilities, while soldiers and servants were relegated to communal areas, often exposed to drafts and odors. Chamber pots, emptied by lower ranking staff, reinforced societal divisions. Sanitation, like clothing, food, and shelter, mirrored the privileges and limitations imposed by class. Odors were omnipresent, even with ash, straw, and ventilation. The smell of waste permeated castle life. Noble quarters might use fragrant herbs or incense, but the stench remained. Residents adapted by planning routes through the castle, scheduling activities to avoid heavily used areas, and maintaining personal habits that minimized contact with filth. The pervasive smell influenced behaviors, room placement, and daily life in ways historians often overlook. During sieges, sanitation challenges became acute. Overflowing pits and clogged garderobes created health hazards, while waste could be weaponized against attackers. Narrow shafts and tunnels, while primarily for sanitation, occasionally became points of vulnerability. This dual nature, both protective and potentially dangerous, underscores the complexity of waste management in medieval castles. The story of sanitation in castles is ultimately one of resilience, adaptation, and ingenuity. From chamber pots to garderobes, cesspits to moats, every element of the system worked together to sustain life. The quiet labor of servants and gong farmers, combined with the architectural skill of builders, ensured that castles could function as thriving communities, even under the harshest conditions. Sanitation may seem mundane compared to battles or royal intrigue, but it was foundational. Without it, castles would have been overwhelmed by disease and filth, undermining every other aspect of life. The systems developed by medieval communities reveal a deep understanding of human needs, environmental management, and the challenges of living in large, fortified structures. Medieval castles were as much about survival as they were about power and prestige. Beyond the grandeur of stone towers, great halls, and fortified walls lay a hidden world of daily necessities, chief among them, waste management. Without effective sanitation, the life of hundreds of people within the walls could quickly descend into chaos. The garderobe was central to this system. Built into walls, towers, or projecting sections, garderobes allowed waste to fall safely away from living areas. Nobles had private garderobes near their chambers, often fitted with wooden seats or lids to enhance comfort. Soldiers and servants relied on communal benches, where efficiency took precedence over privacy. These designs illustrate a sophisticated understanding of functionality and the practical needs of castle life. Cesspits acted as storage for waste, removed from garderobes or chamber pots. Some were lined with stone, others with wood, but all required regular attention. The essential labor of gong farmers ensured that these pits did not overflow. Operating mostly at night, they removed waste with shovels and buckets, enduring foul odors and health risks. Without their efforts, castles would have been overrun by filth, disease, and unlivable conditions, demonstrating that survival depended on their often overlooked work. Moats provided dual benefits. Though primarily defensive, they frequently functioned as waste repositories. Garderobe shafts often emptied into moats, along with animal waste and discarded food scraps. Flowing water carried some refuse away, but stagnant sections became breeding grounds for disease and insects. Excavations have revealed layers of preserved waste, giving historians insight into medieval diets, domestic habits, and the continuous struggle for cleanliness within these stone fortresses. Resourcefulness characterized medieval waste management. Urine was collected for leather tanning, dye fixing, and chemical processes such as saltpeter production. Animal manure enriched fields and gardens, while human excrement, once decomposed, could fertilize crops. These practices demonstrate how medieval communities turned unpleasant materials into practical resources, ensuring sustainability and survival. Health risks were constant. Overcrowding, clogged garderobes, and stagnant moats created ideal conditions for the spread of dysentery, cholera, and typhoid. During sieges, these problems intensified, with waste accumulating rapidly and hygiene practices breaking down. Chroniclers often recorded that more soldiers and inhabitants died from disease than from attacks, emphasizing the critical importance of sanitation. Castle engineers displayed remarkable innovation. Garderobe shafts were angled to protect walls and foundations. Rudimentary flushing systems were sometimes employed using rainwater, and wooden lids, straw, or ventilation improved usability. These adaptations illustrate how medieval builders solved practical problems with the materials and knowledge available, creating systems that supported large populations. Social hierarchy strongly influenced sanitation. Nobles enjoyed private, well-maintained facilities, while soldiers and servants relied on communal areas that were less convenient and often exposed. Chamber pots were emptied by lower-ranking staff, reinforcing societal structures. Sanitation, like food, clothing, and shelter, reflected social privilege and divisions within the castle community. Odors shaped daily life. Even with ash, straw, herbs, or ventilation, the smell of waste permeated the castle. Noble quarters might employ fragrant herbs or incense, but the stench remained noticeable. Residents adapted by planning their routes, timing daily routines, and taking precautions to avoid the most odorous areas. The persistent presence of smell reveals how sanitation influenced behaviors, architecture, and movement within castles. During sieges, sanitation challenges became acute. Overflowing pits and clogged garderobes endangered defenders' health, while waste could be used offensively against attackers. Narrow shafts sometimes served as potential infiltration points. These factors illustrate that waste management was not merely domestic, it played a role in strategy and defense. The story of medieval waste management is ultimately one of ingenuity, adaptation, and survival. From chamber pots to garderobes, from cesspits to moats, the interconnected systems maintained life inside fortified walls. The quiet labor of servants and gong farmers, combined with the design skill of builders, ensured that castles remained habitable even under difficult conditions. Sanitation, often overlooked in historical accounts, was as vital to medieval life as food, water, or security. The systems developed reveal a nuanced understanding of human needs, environmental management, and practical problem solving, demonstrating that medieval castles were as much feats of engineering for daily living as they were of military might. Medieval castles are often remembered for their towering walls, imposing gates, and elaborate halls. But survival inside these stone fortresses depended on far more practical matters. Chief among them was waste management, an essential system that ensured the health, hygiene, and daily functioning of the castle's inhabitants. Without proper sanitation, even the grandest fortress could deteriorate into chaos. The garderobe was a key feature of sanitation, strategically positioned in towers, walls, or protruding structures. These latrine chambers allowed waste to fall safely away from living spaces. Nobles typically had private garderobes near their chambers, often with wooden seats or covers to enhance comfort. Soldiers and servants relied on communal benches, which, though less private, were practical for larger populations. The design of these facilities reflects careful consideration of hygiene, gravity, and accessibility. Cesspits provided storage for waste collected from garderobes and chamber pots. Some were lined with stone to prevent collapse, while others were wooden or simple dug pits. Emptying these pits was the responsibility of gong farmers, who performed this critical labor mostly at night. They faced foul odors, toxic gases, and disease, yet without their work, castles would have been unlivable. Their role demonstrates the dependence of medieval communities on often invisible laborers. Moats served both defensive and hygienic purposes. Many garderobe shafts emptied directly into these water-filled trenches, along with animal excrement and discarded food. Flowing sections carried some waste away, but stagnant parts became breeding grounds for disease and pests. Archaeological excavations of moats reveal layers of preserved waste, providing historians with invaluable insight into medieval diets, domestic habits, and daily challenges of life within a castle. Resourcefulness defined medieval waste management. Urine was collected for tanning leather, fixing dyes, and chemical processes such as saltpeter production. Animal manure fertilized gardens and fields, while decomposed human waste was sometimes reused to enrich agricultural land. These practices highlight the ingenuity of medieval societies, which made the most of available resources to sustain food production and maintain castle life. Health concerns were ever present. Overcrowding, blocked shafts, and unclean garderobes facilitated the spread of diseases like dysentery, cholera, and typhoid. During sieges, sanitation problems intensified. Waste accumulated rapidly, water sources became contaminated, and hygienic practices deteriorated. Records from sieges indicate that disease often killed more people than enemy attacks, emphasizing the importance of sanitation for survival. Castle architects demonstrated remarkable problem-solving skills. Garderobe shafts were often angled to prevent structural damage. Wooden lids and ventilation improved usability, and some castles incorporated basic flushing mechanisms using rainwater or diverted streams. These innovations illustrate practical intelligence and an understanding of physics, hygiene, and materials. Medieval builders applied these solutions to sustain hundreds of inhabitants under challenging conditions. Social hierarchy influenced sanitation access. Nobles had private, well-maintained garderobes, while soldiers and servants relied on communal facilities. Chamber pots were emptied by lower-ranking staff, reinforcing social structures and privilege. Even sanitation reflected the broader social order, where comfort and hygiene were closely tied to rank. Odors were a constant challenge. Despite the use of ash, straw, herbs, and ventilation, the smell of waste persisted throughout the castle. Noble quarters sometimes used fragrant plants or incense to mitigate odors, but the stench remained noticeable. Residents adapted daily routines, room placements, and pathways to avoid the worst smells. The pervasive presence of odor demonstrates how sanitation shaped daily life in subtle yet profound ways. During sieges, waste management became a matter of strategy. Overflowing pits and clogged garderobes threatened defenders' health, while waste could also be used offensively against attackers. Narrow garderobe shafts occasionally created points of vulnerability. These examples show that sanitation intersected with both domestic life and military strategy. Ultimately, the story of waste in castles is one of resilience, ingenuity, and adaptation. From chamber pots to garderobes, cesspits to moats, every part of the system worked together to support life. The labor of servants, the planning of engineers, and the ingenuity of builders ensured that castles remained habitable, even under siege or harsh conditions. Sanitation, though often overlooked in historical narratives, was as crucial as food, water, or defense. The systems developed in medieval castles highlight practical knowledge, environmental awareness, and innovative problem solving. They reveal a hidden world where survival depended not just on strength or weapons, but on the management of daily necessities. Medieval castles often inspire images of grandeur, soaring towers, stone walls, and grand halls filled with nobility. Yet, beneath this spectacle lay the practical realities of daily life, chief among them, waste management. Without effective sanitation, even the strongest fortress could become uninhabitable, and survival depended as much on hidden labor and ingenuity as on military strength. The garderobe formed the backbone of castle sanitation, positioned along outer walls or in projecting towers. These latrine chambers allowed waste to fall away from living spaces. Nobles typically had private garderobes near their chambers, offering convenience and comfort, often with wooden seats or lids. Soldiers and servants relied on communal benches, which prioritized practicality over privacy. The design demonstrates careful attention to functionality, hygiene, and structural safety. Cesspits acted as storage for waste, collected from garderobes and chamber pots. Some were lined with stone to prevent collapse, while others were wooden or simple earth pits. The essential labor of Gonk farmers ensured that these cesspits did not overflow. Working mostly at night, they faced foul odors, toxic gases, and exposure to disease. Though largely invisible and often stigmatized, their work was indispensable for maintaining castle life. Moats had a dual purpose, functioning both as a defensive barrier and a waste repository. Garderobe shafts frequently emptied into moats, carrying animal waste, food scraps, and human refuse away from the castle. Flowing water helped transport some of this waste, but stagnant sections could become dangerous breeding grounds for insects and disease. Excavated layers from moats provide historians with detailed evidence of medieval diets, domestic practices, and sanitation strategies. Resourcefulness was a hallmark of medieval waste management. Urine was collected for leather tanning, dyeing fabrics, and producing chemicals like saltpeter for early firearms. Animal manure fertilized gardens and fields, while human excrement, when properly decomposed, could be returned to farmland. These practices demonstrate how medieval communities turned repulsive materials into valuable resources, sustaining life and agriculture. Health was an ever-present concern. Overcrowding, blocked garderobes, and stagnant moats facilitated the spread of diseases such as dysentery, cholera, and typhoid. During sieges, these problems intensified, with waste accumulating rapidly and hygiene practices deteriorating. Historical accounts often note that disease killed more defenders than enemy attacks, underscoring the critical role of sanitation in medieval survival. Castle builders displayed remarkable ingenuity. Garderobe shafts were angled to protect foundations. Rudimentary flushing systems employed rainwater or diverted streams, and wooden lids or ventilation slits improved usability. These innovations reveal practical intelligence and problem solving that allowed castles to sustain hundreds of residents under challenging conditions. Social hierarchy influenced access to sanitation. Nobles had private, well-maintained facilities, while soldiers and servants relied on communal garderobes. Chamber pots were emptied by lower-ranking staff, reflecting broader social divisions. Even basic hygiene practices were shaped by rank and privilege, highlighting how societal structures permeated every aspect of life. Odors were a constant challenge. Despite straw, ash, herbs, and ventilation, the smell of waste permeated castle life. Nobles sometimes used fragrant plants or incense, yet the stench remained noticeable. Residents adapted by carefully planning routes through the castle, timing their activities, and arranging living spaces to minimize contact with the most odorous areas. The presence of smell influenced behaviors and daily routines in profound ways. During sieges, sanitation was critical, not just for health, but also for strategy. Overflowing pits threatened defenders, and waste could be thrown at attackers as an improvised weapon. Narrow garderobe shafts sometimes presented potential vulnerabilities. This intersection of hygiene, survival, and defense underscores the importance of waste management in medieval castles. The story of sanitation in castles is ultimately one of resilience, adaptation, and survival. From chamber pots to garderobes, cesspits to moats, the interconnected systems sustained life inside stone walls. The labor of servants and gong farmers, combined with the architectural planning of builders, ensured that castles remained functional even under siege or adverse conditions. Sanitation, often overlooked in historical narratives, was as vital as water, food, or military strength. Medieval castles reveal a hidden world where survival depended not just on fortifications or armies, but on the ingenuity and diligence devoted to managing the daily necessities of life. The systems developed reflect practical knowledge, environmental awareness, and the human capacity for adaptation, a testament to the resilience of medieval communities. As we reflect on these hidden aspects of castle life, it becomes clear that the grandeur of medieval fortresses depended as much on the unseen labor and clever design of sanitation systems as on stone walls or iron weapons. Without these efforts, the castles we admire today would have been far less habitable and medieval life far more precarious.